Hello and welcome to Venture Best Spotlight, a podcast presented by Venture Best, the venture capital and emerging companies practice group here at Michael Best and Friedrich. We're your hosts, Evan Lonergan and Emily McGovern.
On this podcast, we will be featuring some of our amazing founder clients and network of venture capital managers, each of whom is inspiring instrumental change to the way the venture economy produces, invests, does business, and even defines a startup.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Venture Best Spotlight, the podcast series presented by Venture Best. Here on the Venture Best Spotlight, we feature exciting and innovative guests from the venture markets throughout the United States, featuring both our incredible clients and friends of the firm. Venture Best is the venture capital practice group at Michael Best and Friedrich LLP, focusing on emerging companies, startups, venture capital, and transactions at all points in the life cycle. Today's podcast is hosted by me, Evan Lonergan, and venture partner David Morris. Keith and Tom of Resilient Ventures are joining us. Keith and Tom, please tell us a little bit about the background, what led you to venture, and what inspired you to found Resilient Ventures.
Well, thanks for having us on. Grateful to be a part of your show here today. And I'm Keith and Tom. We have been doing life together for a long time. First got involved through some mutual friends who were very concerned after coming back from a mission trip abroad about the marginalized community in Durham in particular. Tom and I have lived in Durham now 70 plus years, coming, two different worlds colliding with a particular interest around what some people characterize as marginalized groups or, folks who are in, economically challenged areas. And so that conversation started back in 2010. We read a book called The Disintegration of Black America. I think about that time a lot because we hosted it in our home with some mutual friends. Really insightful book, looking historically about how we've tried to pursue, we being, people of color in particular, have tried to pursue, quote, the American dream and what that looks like. So that conversation, after we wrapped up investing in these mutual friends and their commitment to the work, essentially we served on a board together, kind of an advisory board with these two really amazing people who we may name at some point, but don't like to implicate people who we haven't already told them we're going to say so. But at any rate, that eventually led to Tom and I. We met again at my church. We were hosting a conversation around racial reconciliation. One of my mentors from Duke, actually, one of my student mentees, I should say, from Duke, was leading that conversation. He was heading up an initiative in the Walltown neighborhood of Durham, which has a long history. And if, for those listening, you might hear us make reference to a lot of names over time, especially we have so many incredible legacies in Durham. But Mr. Wall, the story of Mr. Wall in relationship to Duke University is one where, I won't go into it. It'd take us far too off track. But I guess I'll leave it there for Tom to pick up when we met in that second partnership. Or if you want to, pick up somewhere else, that's fine too.
Well, I'll just bookend mine because that's a 50-year-old question. But when I was a kid, my mom taught computer science at Rutgers. My dad built computers at Princeton Penn. And he was also a director in a venture-backed company. So I saw my dad's company go to an IPO. They raised money. We bought a house. My parents would talk about the venture capitalists by name at the dinner table, and one was Dick Colgate, so it was Colgate money that was backing this company. And then 50 years later, I find myself, maybe it wasn't 50, somewhere around there. It seems like a while from when I was a kid to now. But Keith and I were taking groups through the conversation of racial equity. And being in Durham, we have a rich heritage of Black Wall Street and some really important names. We were studying the lives of John Merrick, and we wandered into the question of what if we're not living in a time like the time of Jackie Robinson? And we can all imagine what it would have been like to be part of seeing the landscape, that there was another league of Black baseball players out there that could play in the major leagues. They didn't need to be coached. They just needed to get in the game. And we realized that we're living in those times right now. And there's an entire league of African American founders who, but for capital and some introductions, should be playing in the game of venture. Just like I helped build that ecosystem here in North Carolina. I've been here since the 80s roughly, and I was one of those people that helped build this space for us. So that's my inspiration. That's my bookend of my life for you to that question.
I love the baseball analogy. So how did those conversations turn into Resilient Ventures? Or tell us about, the genesis of the firm, and tie it back to those conversations about inequity.
Well, we kind of toyed around with some different ways to do it. And there are angel funds that have network options. We both had, Keith has a long background also in entrepreneurship, running a program at the Fuqua School, which he can tell you about. But we realized we had a interest in entrepreneurship and background and knowledge in that space. So we just had to run some different options. And, we had a meeting with David here in our offices early on, and to the question of is it a network or is it a fund? And David was emphatic, you got to create a committed capital fund. And I think that was a solid piece of advice for us. And that's where we took it.
Yeah, I've hung around a lot of successful business people, mainly through my work in higher education and being at Fuqua for 8 years, and then running a summer institute there, basically taking rising high school seniors throughout the Southeast in the early days in the 90s when banks were supporting these programs that were targeting students of color from all over the country. So being in boardrooms and in corporate settings by way of being essentially a facilitator of relationships between the Fuqua School's commitment to access and opportunity, helped write their first diversity statement, which is actually their principal diversity statement for the school in its early days. I guess, looking back, sometimes you don't know what you're a part of until you have a chance to look back. But I joined Fuqua in the early 90s, right when it was changing its curriculum to more of a term-based system and a more high-paced environment. And they also were really setting their culture firmly around a variety of values that really jive with mine, the primary one being teamwork. So again, being fortunate to be on a lot of really highly successful teams, kind of gave me the gumption that, well, I think we can find successful teams. I think we know what they look like. I certainly know what they look like in my community. So, when time came around and we thought about launching the fund, the first question is where would we get the money? And really wasn't a hard question at that point. We had the relationships. Now we're just, convincing people that these kind of two yahoos without a traditional track record or background in the industry, could pull it off with an explicit thesis around, high growth companies led by African Americans. Fortunately, we were able to do that with a fairly small size fund that, most people would say you need at least 10 million to get going. So we've proved that you don't have to be quite 10 million. And I guess there's other examples out there, first funds in our area who probably started with 5 or 6 or whatever it was. Yeah, just start doing the work.
That makes sense. So can you expand a little bit on that idea of the investment thesis, and sort of how it differentiates Resilient from, all the other firms out there?
Well, I'll just quickly go back to the analogy. When you're a person of color and you're around brilliance all the time, the question of, are there opportunities out there for funding to fund great ideas and great people that, wasn't a second question for me. To be very explicit about that, well, we knew we'd face some challenges with that. Some people would say, oh, that's nice, that's charitable, that's a good thing you're doing, attaboy, maybe you should be a nonprofit. Why don't you think about, just straight impact? So we had to walk through some of that. But And we had some examples we could point to. David was the first one to say, well, when you're putting together your pitch, your presentation, tell us about a few of these companies that would fit your thesis. And we had a few here locally. We did a non-traditional investment to signal about Black Wall Street and its legacy. So it's just about diving in and doing the work. And like anything else, raising money is gonna. I mean, you can have the greatest, I guess, industry or sector you could characterize in the world, and you still got to convince people in this high risk environment that you have enough sightline and a competency to make solid decisions. And that's we just set out to do that. The first, and again, for me, not coming from the traditional straight business side, the question of learning what would be central to our thesis. I mean, the first person said to us, be agnostic, and then at that time was like, well, that feels kind of weird. That feels like, well, we just invest in anything, and I had to think particularly about my skill set, my experience, my industry. And I was like, okay, we could say we're agnostic, but the reality is I kind of live in the ed tech world. I live in the education space. I live in human resource space. I live in space that have to do with wellness and people being better people. So I'm going to have interest and appetite and expertise on that side. Then Tom brings, his lanes of competency. But yeah, so our thesis essentially was like, we're going to find Black founders and show the world that they're, we're not living in a fantasy land. Like there are Jackie Robinsons and there are Madam C.J. Walkers. And, we happen to find one that essentially is fulfilling that sort of, iconic truth that we have some brilliant people out there that they just need more capital. They simply just need the checks to grow.
Totally. So it all comes down to that initial insight that it's not a pipeline problem, but a problem of access, and then building on top of that.
And we started the fund just before COVID. And here in North Carolina, there were already 10 pitch competitions, around the state that were inviting African-American founders only, pretty much. I mean, we had Google for Entrepreneurs Black Founders here. We had Black Wall Street Homecoming. We had Raleigh Black Entrepreneurship Week, So we could see already that there were high growth African-American founders to invest in who had revenue, who had product market fit. So, it is, we do have a thesis. We're not totally agnostic. Are they, are these companies entering their growth phase where they need capital to catalyze their growth? And that's what venture is all about. And there are those kind of companies right here in North Carolina and the immediate, Southeast too. We ended up with 2 companies in Atlanta, a Chicago company and a Detroit company.
Absolutely. And speaking of North Carolina, I'll kick it over to David for the next question.
So yeah, so Keith and Tom, I know that you've been, in the fundraising stage for Fund 2, and based on the success that you've had in identifying and funding your companies that meet your investment thesis in Fund 1, I know that Resilient was recently selected as a recipient of investment from NC Invest, SSBCI program that was funded by the U.S. Treasury Department. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what impact it's had both on your fundraising? I know that you were guys, it was publicly announced with Vice President Kamala Harris coming to North Carolina to announce the funds that received investment. So love to hear your thoughts and insights regarding that.
I'll try it first. I think it speaks to, well, first of all, as a second fund, it's still very hard to reach institutional investors. As a first-time fund, it was basically impossible. Add to the fact that Keith and I don't come from private equity, so we weren't working at one of these places, then go and decide to start our own fund. So all that was stacked against us. And even as we envisioned the second fund, we had people that said, fund of funds would say, we'll invest in you, but you got to be $25 million fund, because we had a track record by then. So to be selected by, SSBCI and to win the Treasury money, it's a very selective process. So I do think it signals that we have a major institutional investor trusting us and looking at our track record and looking at our LPs, and they look at everything. They do a very detailed diligence on us. So what it does is affirm that we are ready and trustworthy and capable.
Keith, any thoughts?
Yeah, as Tom said, I mean, the biggest question mark if we're going to be a viable venture, you need an anchor institution. Tom was in our first fund. Tom was willing to leverage some of his wealth in that way. Again, for our listeners, me coming into space quite transparently, I was coming out of philanthropy, faith-based nonprofit work, not a high net worth individual. But fortunately, by way of not, having started my own consulting and firm educational space, I did have a pretty wide, my network was wide enough. So in fact, I was fortunate to know the folks at the NC Rural Center, and one in particular, for years we had been in conversations when I was running a nonprofit. There again, you never know what relationship will help you turn a corner. But the fact that the NC Rural Center is the I guess fiduciary mediator of the SSBC NC Invest was a tremendous access for us. And as Tom said, we did a lot of work. We were foot soldiers in the beginning. We met with several hundred people, from the Bill Spruills, going to Charlotte, getting down to Atlanta. We hosted an event down there, and then the pandemic hit. So it did give us a chance for people to see, touch, and feel us, and we had to kind of be in that virtual space. So it was really it really means a lot that we have the support of the U.S. Treasury and the the accountability and really tremendous support. And so we definitely want to give a shout out to Vicki Gibbs and Rodney Sampson and Armir Kitchen, and just the effort and the time and the work that they're doing to make sure we're going to be successful.
So now that you've received that investment, how are you leveraging that in terms of just generally fundraising, as well as identifying portfolio companies? And what does it mean for your overall portfolio company strategy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I first say it's really neat we knew some of the other fund managers already. Again, part of our quote building our brand was to be unashamedly calling up other funds and getting acquainted with the other funds that were out there. So to be a part of a cohort in and of itself, you can exchange a lot of information, and there's it's kind of a built-in trust system there. So we definitely are talking. It creates a group, and we're looking for ways that, whether the word is syndicate or what have you. I mean, we have that local group here, which is important to talk about deals, to see where industry trends. Just came back from First Flight today, and RTP Angel Capital Group hosted a session on diligence. So just more market intelligence, more understanding the risk and the nuances of the work. Certainly, it makes us more attractive to potential investors, and we did see an uptick in being able to close some additional investors, and that just all around just positive for us in that way. We still have to work as hard just to get in to certain rooms, but it certainly has opened up some doors for additional conversations about investing. And we certainly have gotten a lot of entrepreneurs are reaching out. They, once that hit the map, they know we got capital to deploy. We've seen a good trend in that. No small small impact there.
Anything you would like to add, Tom?
I would just go back to my point. The diligence that they did to us gives LPs greater confidence. We've had to up our game. I mean, the taking the money adds some, we're being treated more like an institutional investment. So we have to have the audit and we have to get reporting every quarter. So those kind of things make us more, I guess, LP friendly. So that's been a great help. It does limit our focus slightly because now we're pretty much constrained to invest in North Carolina. But given, the pipeline and deal flow really has changed in 5 years. It's really gotten so much better. And Durham being essentially now one of the epicenters for Black entrepreneurship makes this ideal for us. And so being constrained to North Carolina is less of a concern at this point.
Great, and it's wonderful to see the transition of the quality of the companies that you're considering as potential portfolio companies from Fund One versus Fund Two. And can you just tell, just give a quick summary of what how's that manifested itself in what you've seen in the deal flow, your pipeline?
Well, right out the gate, I think we got the opportunity to invest in a company that's just going to be amazing. I mean, I can tell you everything about them. There's no secrets here per se. I mean, it's a spin out of Amazon. Amazon, after George Floyd, had a program whereby they intended to scale 100 companies, 100 Black founders to 100 million through their pipeline supplier readiness program. Amazon knew how to scale, so they were going to take 100 Black founders to scale. And that team worked for a year and a half to make that happen. And then Amazon decided, for some good reasons, that they couldn't do it or shouldn't do it. I mean, there's some valid reasons. So the entire team spun out. And so now you have a company with the 4 principal team members who have contracts with 10 Fortune 200 companies who financed more than their first year of growth. Each of those companies will scale 10 of their suppliers. So it works out for, if you're a Fortune 200 enterprise buyer, you need your suppliers to scale with you. You need them to grow. That prevents risk. We've heard so much about supply side risk during COVID. Mm-hmm. So it's more and more important that your suppliers can scale with you. And it's not just a matter of the 7%, allocations to diverse founders. It's that and more. So we have a company led by a Harvard MBA, McKinsey graduate, FAMA graduate, who really knows how to lead a company. This is not his first rodeo. He had a company before, Y Combinator alumni. So, we're just terribly excited about this company and what they can do. And, potentially every year they can be scaling 100 Black-owned companies, doubling their revenue or adding a couple million every single one. So, and then we have 2 more companies that we haven't announced yet, but that are also, one's a SaaS product, and the other is in EdTech themselves. And we're learning to look at, the rule of 40, which says, and venture's learning this too, by the way. Venture spent, a decade on high-flying revenue scaling without a concern for cost containment. And they've learned their lesson, we think. Anyway, we're learning to see that and apply it. So, we've got a company that by next year is going to fit the rule of 40, which means when you add their growth to their negative EBITDA, you still end up with 40% growth. So I'm terribly excited about what we've got. And these are still companies that no one's looking at, It's just, I won't say nobody,
Yeah,
more people,
not quite
more
nobody.
people. Some of these have our venture friends in North Carolina are involved. So times are changing for the better, but they're still underlooked. I will say that.
Yeah, it's an opportunity for you guys to earn excess alpha, all right,
Yes.
because of the low profiles that these companies tend to have.
Yeah.
Keith, I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just grateful. I talked with a founder who I met at Black Wall Street Homecoming in 2018. He's based in Charlotte, and it's just fun watching him grow, his company grow. These are most of our companies have been at it. I mean, one of our main leading companies, this will be year 12, or this is year 12 for her. And, we know that capital is key. If they've demonstrated that they can manage and cost and expenses and innovate, it's just really fun to watch. And we've seen the hard side of that too. We've seen the impact of COVID on Fund One portfolio. We had a lot of discussion today. Again, the same meeting that we came out of the difference between what a successful CEO looks like for a growth company, right? I mean, when you get to certain points, we've seen, the dynamics of looking at the characters of our teams and the CEO, their growth and their challenges. I think, again, it is important that our founders see that they have support. So we're now trying to be more intentional about the reality of like venture support, like needing, really quality legal at a moderate cost, quality strategy support, operations. I mean, all those different layers, right? How can we close some of the gaps around that? Because that's very real when you're trying to grow, because you timing, growing at the right size, so we are growing up with these founders. I think sometimes I get a chance to step back and realize that, we're entrepreneurs ourselves. And so we trying to understand their mindset, when we're having a conversation about valuation, and it's like, we're either way here or there, we're trying to close that space. And as you know, coaching us on the different financing terms, I think that's something else we came into it, quite transparently. I just thought Shark Tank, you get 20% of the company and, you need to exit in, 3 years, you need to have this much money. And it's like, nah, there's so much more to terms around what that looks like. So watching the founders figure it out, try to get smarter on their end, try not to lose their company, both in terms of, long-term equity, and then just what is the mission and vision they have for the company. So.
Yeah, and I guess to follow up a question that Evan, I had asked earlier, in terms of the investment thesis or strategy, how has it changed in terms of the types of securities you invest in now? Are you still more at the early seed capital stage, or is it more, or pre-seed stage, or are you more at the seed stage where you're doing like, Series C capital, that kind of investment, as opposed to maybe more convertible notes like you would when you're,
Yeah.
when you're looking at, where you can't bridge that valuation gap with the entrepreneur.
Well, I think that's guided for us almost. I'm realizing, like, with the state of venture today, we're still dealing with, 2 years of bridge financing, right? A lot of people aren't doing a Series A right now. So, the first investment that we made, you might call a Series Seed. It was a convertible note, but the company had $500,000 of revenue, so I wouldn't call it like seed stage. But it was their first financing. The one that we're looking at right now is they already had a Series A. Now they're doing a bridge round. So our first participation with them will be a bridged round. Hope trying to get to their Series A. Um, a lot of our follow-on investment, well, I'd say half and half were bridge rounds in Series A in Fund One. So yeah, our initial thought when we created Fund Two that we'd be mostly doing Series A, but likely given the landscape right now, it's more like similar to what we were doing, but larger checks, saving follow on for the Series A.
Right. So, as a fund that supports diverse entrepreneurs, which is critical to your thesis, what sort of challenges or obstacles have you encountered within the venture capital space as you seek to deploy capital, or working with potential co-investors, other funds in order to provide additional capital for your portfolio companies?
I think the being emerging managers. I'm not sure I still embrace that term as fully, but as you know, David, these conversations behind, having a track record, having the, reality of how funds grow and emerge, right? Um, I did not anticipate that we would have, and again, these are terms I'm quite unashamedly acknowledging that I wouldn't have known what these terms meant prior to this work, right? All I knew was exit. Company gets sold, you get a big win. Um, but we've been fortunate to be in a scenario now because what we learned from one of our entrepreneurs about a term sheet around revenue share, we hit a revenue share mark and we can pay our investors back some portion of their investment. That I didn't know how good that would feel, right? Even if you qualify by saying, a partial exit or a liquidation event. But this is what we're here to do. We're here to make money for our investors and hopefully make quite a lot of it for our entrepreneurs as well. And to the excitement of this work is that we get to be in a position to do that. Um, the challenges are what they are. I think when we set up Fund One, we told the narrative for Fund One was come join us and be a part of the historical movement to address the 400 years of history of disenfranchisement and dehumanization of people of color, in particular Black folks in this country. Very missional. I tell people our why was unquestionable. I can stand up in front of any group and unabashedly stand there and not feel like I'm asking for charity. I'm saying we want to participate too in ventures. So we had a very clear and compelling narrative around using the major league, Negro League kind of dynamic. Fund Two was more not we told you so, but you really need to pay attention because value is left on the field that we can now demonstrate through a track record, through amazing CEOs and founders. And so that feels really good. And we can confidently stand in front of groups now. We still have to face the same, very important questions around, how do we operate? How do we make decisions? Who is our investment committee? Do you really have a thesis or not? Or is it just you're getting money to Black folks, and it's like, no, look at our, B2B, it's SaaS oriented, it's tech enabled. But we don't want to be narrow minded about where the possibilities might lie when we find, really talented and brilliant folks. And we have learned from several mistakes about what that looks like. So yeah, I mean, I think that the basis of your question around the challenges or and we use the term headwinds using the cycling analogy, right? Like if you go on the basis of, like, as people of color, African Americans, and again, we've had these conversations. We often don't have them in public a lot, even though they have been more public. And then, of course, now everybody doesn't really want to have these conversations anymore, because it's to me, it's not whining. It's like, look, we know the venture capital world has been explicitly and egregiously funding mostly white male founders. Um,
Mhm.
we're not going to just. I just can't have that conversation anymore. Now it's like, you're missing out, and we're gonna show you what you're missing. Um, and it's been interesting to see more attention being drawn from other funds about the reality of this. Some of them are a little bit pigeonholed because they might be only in, explicitly certain sectors, and there might not be as many of us in those spaces. And again, I'll lift up Karen Levert's fund, like the ag tech fund, like that. That's an industry I have no knowledge about, but really excited about where she's taking her company, her fund, and the backing she's getting for that, because we need that. Again, you, I, yeah. So let me just stop there, because some people, if they look at my background, they know I'm a preacher at heart. So when I get on a message, like, yeah, I'm not letting go till some folks start opening their wallets and saying, yeah, you're right. You're right. This is where we need to be, uh, making a more intentional, explicit commitment, because historically the numbers are just horrible, and it is what it is.
Yeah, that's a tough question to name. We're living with the obstacles for so long that it's like hard to name them. You're just kind of used to them. But I know when the fund started, one of the obstacles was philanthropy. You should be a not for profit. In other words, these companies, they're worth giving money to, but they're not worth investing in them. So now we have 2 exits, and we're actually working on a third that's on right on the near horizon. And so we can counter that. These are companies that will return the investment. I think, and not so much an obstacle, but the frame of mind. Like, I would think that if you had an opportunity as an LP to be a part of like a real culture changing moment. I mean, was it 2 years ago we had 2 black quarterbacks facing off at the Super Bowl? It was 2 years ago, right? Now, you know, can you even imagine when Coke and Pepsi are run by black CEOs, and we can be part of that change, just like the change in black baseball. But I guess if we were living at the time of in the 40s, there weren't that many people that saw that opportunity and were able to be part of it. But boy, here's a second chance. And that's what's an obstacle to me. Why don't more people really see that, right?
All right. So, what does North Carolina have within its ecosystem of entrepreneurs and capital allocators that make it unique when compared to other up and coming markets that are out there?
Well, North Carolina, as an entrepreneurial ecosystem for years, has been known as one of collaboration. And that's been my experience in the 80s and the 90s. And it was very, we would get all the software companies together and have roundtables in the 90s. We'd all get together, CEOs of all different software companies, sit around a table and talk about whatever we needed to talk about, marketing or whatever. And it was always good to get collaboration and insight from each other. And North Carolina is still known for that. And so here we are with a rich culture of African American founders in places like Google for Entrepreneurs for Black Founder Week, and they're bringing back Black Homecoming under a different name, I believe, and so we're going to see all these groups that kind of stopped operation for COVID coming back, and we see that. So it's a combination of the entrepreneurs and just the overall climate of the region. And I have seen a change in attitude across the color line of a willingness to start to build those kind of relationships across the color line, and white founders and white ventures seeing Black founders as more than just someone they want to help out and mentor, but someone that they are willing to consider investing in. So there is a change of mindset going. And so add that to what we already have as North Carolina as entrepreneurial space, and then what we have historically as Black Wall Street, and Durham is the only place during Jim Crow where African Americans were migrating to and not leaving. Just speaks. I mean, we are on hallowed ground right here, and it's an epicenter for Black entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I mean, you look around the country, and David, probably at some other point, I get your mindset of the landscape in terms of cities, right? Before the pandemic, one of the excitements for me with this job, even though I left Fuqua at a time when my family was growing, my son had turned 2, and my son was born in '98. I left Fuqua in 2000, right when as I said, I was kind of part of Fuqua's startup area when I had to travel around the country, recruiting MBA students, right, and outside of the country. And I said, I don't want to do that anymore. But starting this field, I was like, man, it's exciting to go to places like Atlanta, Charlotte, with the universities, the emergence of universities, centers of innovation entrepreneurship, including our own wonderful Duke University. I remember being there when David Rubenstein kind of launched that initiative, and the excitement, as I said, watching young people, the possibility to start their own ventures or to enter into the venture space. And then, of course, like you said, Black Wall Street Homecoming was really, really just felt exciting. And we've had some experts here meeting folks like Ken Grimes. His name just kind of came in my head when we were building our first set of advisors. Kieran Smith was another one who was in banking. A legacy person like James Sampson, who lineage to John Merrick and Dr. Aaron McDuffie Moore. We're just sitting in this, like I said, it's a legacy city, it's a town, a lot of grit. We need to be able to be a place that not only in name is considered one of the best places to live in the country or come for both whether education, professional growth, and so feel very grateful we could do that while also appreciating what's happening around the country. Had a chance to go to Tulsa last year and see what they're doing there. I understand lots happening in Birmingham. So yeah, not just the South, as the rapping battles went on, East Coast, West Coast, we got something here in the South. The South has something to say, I guess, is that we can put it that way.
Right. You mentioned, how Google has planted roots here in the Triangle, and we're also seeing other companies like Meta and Apple establishing campuses here as well. How do you think that will impact the ecosystem for the better, for the better or for the worse for minority entrepreneurs? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it came up today when we were at First Flight again. They were joking with the IBM people in the room, and it happened to be one of the gentlemen there, and about the question of, you want to invest in founders that are like 2 IBM persons removed, right? Like they come out of an IBM, they start something, they fail, and then they come a second time and they got a better idea. right? So they come out of this corporate entity where they've had all these resources and they've had all this, wonderful time to kind of test and learn things. And then, maybe they can come out, like they say with the Amazon, we use the Amazon analogy. The founder that we have there, he, had a relatively successful run with the company. He gets into Amazon, and is able to really build something special. And I think that could be tremendous. Now the question becomes, how many of us will be able to have that chart that kind of path. Us being people of color in these major growth corporations or companies. And yeah, we certainly hope to see that. I think that's still a question that has to be kind of addressed because of the dismantling of in language and the ideology around inclusion, right? And just the headwinds that are now kind of part and parcel of our country's concern about who's getting opportunity, and it's a very real thing. Again, for our listeners, I spend a good portion of my life and time still very much in the spaces that people are looking at policies and justice related initiatives in the political sphere. Who are the folks that are impacting our state's disposition around. Once again, it's really about access and inclusion. And yeah, we hope North Carolina will have a level of progressiveness, but at the same time, we know we still have some battles to fight around. Where the wealth is going to end up lying, even if we have these amazing companies coming to our community.
That's great. Well, Keith and Tom, thank you for spending time with us this afternoon on the Venture Best podcast. We look forward to seeing what Resilient Ventures continues to do as it proceeds with its investment thesis in the Triangle and beyond. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.